ARMS was the surprise of the Nintendo Switch launch window, a completely original IP with mascot quality and designed by one of Nintendo's most important development groups, the Mario Kart team. Its hype-inducing music, great character designs, and fun mechanics made it stand out in the crowd, while its oddly generic title and rather light array of content probably didn't help it make the leap that Splatoon did truly into the big time. But now it's a long time since EPD9, the development group behind the franchise, last launched an original title. In fact, 2017's Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and ARMS combo was the last time they had retail releases, although Mario Kart Tour and the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Pass have also come out of their corner of the Nintendo sky. Still, while it is likely that a huge amount of effort will have been put into the next Mario Kart, and while a team like this may have another innovative idea to develop or even take to an older one, they created Nintendogs after all, and that franchise would be a great return. This video is to explore what might happen if they decided to take ARMS to the next level. What would a sequel to ARMS look like? How would Nintendo position it? When would they launch it? And why would they make these choices? Settle in for a Nintendo Forecast deep dive into the possible future of the ARMS franchise. Firstly, let's take on the point of whether or not the franchise is likely to return at all, and I think there is a strong likelihood that it will. Kosuke Ibuki did already discuss a sequel briefly with a French interviewer in 2017, showing that he is personally, passionately in favour of another title in this series. He said, "Already let me say that if the game is so successful and the players ask for a sequel, I will be the happiest of men in the world. For now, the only thing I can focus on is bringing enough content so people can play along. However, if I have this opportunity that happens overnight, I can tell you that we will put the whole team on to have the greatest idea that will appeal to all." Given that Nintendo has indulged Yoshio Sakamoto with Famicom Detective Club, they obviously do respect and try to honor the passions of their key creative minds, and Kosuke Ibuki, while much younger than many of Nintendo's senior developers, has probably created more value for Nintendo through his work on Mario Kart 7 and Mario Kart 8 than other whole departments. If he's still keen on ARMS, and he clearly is, I think he will swing a second opportunity for Min Min and company. And while Nintendo may not have been singing it from the rooftops, they've not exactly acted like this is something they want to move on from either. Min Min's appearance in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate must have been decided relatively early in the Switch's life, and perhaps while they still wish to push the franchise a bit more than they've done recently, but nevertheless, putting an ARMS character in such a high-profile position was a decision driven by Nintendo's top brass and not Masahiro Sakurai himself, and this suggests that Nintendo see a future in the ARMS IP. They also have the patience to stick with a franchise and grow it, and it's not like it was any slouch out of the gate, as it beat out many other franchises in sales terms. As friend of the channel and YouTube sensation RogersBase noted, ARMS sold 2.73 million copies. To put that in perspective, it sold more than every Metroid game other than Prime 1 and Dread. That is very good for the first entry of a new fighting game IP, and Min Min's inclusion in Smash has essentially guaranteed a future for the series. The franchise has among its fans a huge number of people, and at least one talking sock. And of course, at a time when Nintendo is trying to keep people attached to its online offerings through Nintendo Switch Online, which offers Nintendo the benefit of a consistent trickle of money through the year, irrespective of the vagaries of its game release windows, a title like ARMS could be hugely valuable to them, more valuable than even these superficial sales numbers may suggest. Now, I do think the when is more difficult. ARMS was a great launch title for Switch because it had breakout potential and utilized the Switch's unique capabilities, but it was also, as was quite clear to anyone who played it, a relatively brief experience and possibly could be programmed by a relatively small group while some of them also are working on new modes to port Mario Kart 8 over to the Switch in the form of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I'm not saying it wasn't a big project for them, but simply that in 2016 and 2017, when Nintendo were really sucking on fumes, they could not afford to stand on ceremony, and every project had to be a big one, even if it was not actually quite as extensive as we are becoming used to from more recent games of the likes of, say, Pikmin 4. We can see with Kirby Star Allies and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 examples of games that were pushed out of the door and then kind of fixed up in the weeks that followed, and it seems plausible to me that this is due in part to the need Nintendo had at that dark time of their corporate history to get big new games out of the door to launch the Switch well and rescue the company from the death spiral it had been on in the decade to date. If they produced a new ARMS game now, I don't think it would be considered bare bones as the original was. And actually, to be fair, the original ARMS did have a number of extra modes, including hoops, 1v100, team fights, Grand Prix, and volleyball, but none of these felt quite as substantial as, let's say, the extensive one-player modes in Splatoon titles. All the same, I'm sure they could find more time to do more with it. It's difficult to imagine that they could go without some kind of adventure or one-player mode and probably a few new characters and locations at the least. Of course, this means that they might not want it for their day one lineup. A new machine is a great time for their biggest titles, Mario Kart being the obvious example, but also for new IP that can utilize the new machine's functionality and possibly appeal to new gamers. Early on, dedicated gamers are likely to try everything simply because there's less choice, and so it makes sense to go with new titles earlier on. But an ARMS sequel would not be new. People have mostly made their judgments on ARMS already, especially the people who would be owning a new Switch 2, who would be mostly existing fans likely to have played the previous title. Rather than launching when a system is new, a new ARMS would need a big install base, big enough to incorporate all previous ARMS fans, but also big enough to have potentially many new fans. Therefore, I would expect ARMS to be much more likely a few years into the console's life. 2028 or 2029 feels like the obvious kind of slot, maybe a bit later even. But it would also need to stand out from the crowd. I think one thing we can expect if there is a new title, and that is newness. As Yabuki-san was quoted with respect to the original ARMS, something that we as a development staff at Nintendo are always being told, and a point that's hammered home by Mr. Miyamoto and senior staff is, are you making something new? Are you making something different? Are you making something unique that hasn't been seen before? That consideration is something we're always thinking about. That consideration about newness cuts across all genres. Now, with Splatoon, the games were actually kind of iterative after the first game to a large degree, but it doesn't have to be that way. For all its relative success, ARMS was not the kind of absolute giant in the playground Splatoon was. Pikmin 2 is quite different in many ways than Pikmin 1 was, and I could see ARMS 2 being rethought to a greater degree, if for no other reason than so much time now has passed and there has been lots of opportunity for new ideas to bubble to the surface and for people to canvass in-depth feedback about the existing title. Some of this will come through the data that previous players have simply produced just by playing the game. Producer Yabuki-san told a French interviewer, "We have all this data through online play actually. The most selected characters are Min Min first and Kid Cobra second. The trend is that players raise their level of play in the Grand Prix mode before going online. It is not very obvious, but it is the basketball that is a little more played than the others. Personally, the only one I didn't really enjoy was volleyball. But how could they innovate? One way it seemed to me is by introducing not just arms, but legs to proceedings. This would be difficult to emulate via Joy-Con play perhaps, but certainly with the introduction of the leg strap via Ring Fit Adventure and Switch Sports, and with the ubiquity of Joy-Con now, there is the possibility that people could play with extendable legs as well as arms, which would add versatility to the play experience. This would also position it effectively once more into the fitness-adjacent gameplay genre, a genre that has been very successful for Nintendo with Ring Fit Adventure, Switch Sports, and the fitness boxing series. Then again, the leg straps probably aren't designed for the more aggressive kicking motions, and Nintendo probably won't want over-eager ARMS players kicking their televisions by mistake or slipping and tripping during climactic online battles. I think there's huge potential for more leg-focused ARMS gameplay, but if I were Nintendo, I would have grave worries about the logistics, and so all things considered, this seems like a low chance of happening, maybe 30% at the absolute max. Another option is to include more collaborative gameplay. Imagine a Streets of Rage style beat 'em up scenario where you and friends online linked up through Nintendo Switch Online and could go round the streets taking care of business as a team of arm extending superheroes. The long arms in this case offer potential for combos that utilize the powers together with massive throws, allowing the characters to bridge themselves across gaps in the landscape. Splatoon's one-player mode showcases shooting skills, but also has quite a large puzzle element, and I could see this being a good way to utilize different gameplay styles in ARMS, especially if they sharpen up the new system's capacity for voice chatting. Or they could go down the route of including guest stars. This might feel like a bit of a cop-out at first, given that ARMS is a discrete IP. Pikmin, Animal Crossing, and Star Fox don't need guest stars coming in to mess things up after all, but look, Nintendo will do whatever they think benefits their IP, and there are certain characters who could look pretty awesome in ARMS form. Ganondorf, Little Mac, and Samus could all be pretty cool, eye-catching additions, especially as post-launch DLC. I don't think this is the way Nintendo usually likes to roll the dice, since Smash and perhaps Mario Kart excluded, they like their games to be sold on the strength and fun and value proposition of the title itself, not on tie-ins like these, but it could be a bit of gravy added afterwards. However, the final thing I think they could look to is what I'm going to call a game change character. I don't know exactly who this would be yet or how it would work, so it sounds quite vague, but let me give you some examples to show you what I mean. Isabelle wasn't in the early Animal Crossing games, but she came to represent the world of Animal Crossing perfectly, at least in the direction that they wanted the later games to be taken. Female oriented, more about community building than living with a bunch of ordinary animals. She was the kind of icon the franchise needed at that point, the kind of icon that represented what it was becoming. And with Pikmin, the Pikmin were cute and interesting to Japanese eyes, but I don't know that the shifty Olimar and Louis quite captured the imagination of the broader audience to the same degree. Pikmin 4 needed a new, heroic icon to go alongside the plucky Pikmin. Someone cute, someone engaging, and so they introduced Oatchi. Love him or loathe him, and personally I think he's great, Oatchi is clearly designed to be not just useful in the gameplay, but cute and appealing as a mascot for the Pikmin. But like Isabelle, his presence also captures something about the game, that everything is at a dog's eye view. If you see the Pikmin on their own in a small world, it might not be immediately obvious that they're that tiny. But if you see a dog running around, even though obviously real dogs are much larger than the Pikmin supposedly are, it puts you into the headspace of a smaller point of view, a pet's eye point of view. So basically, I guess what I'm saying is add a dog to ARMS. Well, not really, but I don't think they quite captured it with Springman and Ribbon Girl. Both characters were incredibly generic, and it's not a surprise that Min Min proved much more popular, although personally my favourite was always Master Mummy. At the very least, I think they'll lean into the weird and wonderful with their new characters, but what they really need is a character that they can build around. Perhaps that character is indeed Min Min, who has the benefit of being not just the most popular legacy character, but surely the most recognisable, thanks to her appearance in Super Smash Bros. Fighters Pass. Min Min has another benefit to them in that Nintendo is always looking to reach new demographics, and while they have a fair few female characters now, though still not many, Min Min, being canonically Chinese, happens to be part of the world's largest diaspora, which might make her a useful character to push in certain markets, including, for that matter, in Japan. The fact is, though, few of these suggestions feel like the kind of fundamental heartland gameplay changes that Nintendo would be looking for, and that's because generally these changes have to be experienced rather than just played. I'm extremely excited to see what these genius creators do next, even though I personally would not expect a new ARMS title for a few years into the next system's life. Still, let me know if you have any cool suggestions for how to resurrect ARMS, and in the meantime, do check out my previous videos on ARMS Dev's EPD9, which goes into a lot more depth about their history and their potential future. Thank you so much for watching, thank you to my Patreon supporters, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.